The two hottest topics in digital health right now are interoperability and cybersecurity. They're important because on one hand, we want all the systems in digital health to work nicely together because that's going to improve efficiency and give insights about patients for clinicians and ultimately deliver better patient care. But the more open and free-flowing information we have, the more prone we are to cyber threats and compromise. Well, a few weeks ago, Talking HealthTech hosted a webinar supported by Dedalus, who are one of the world's leading providers of digital solutions for healthcare. I was joined by Chris Royle, who brings over 30 years of IT experience, specialising in healthcare interoperability and data exchange standards, alongside active roles in HL7 leadership and education, and Stephen Burmester, with 30 years in technology, developing major healthcare ICT systems, and cybersecurity strategies. We had a strong presence of attendees live in the chat of this webinar to help shape the discussion and make sure that the conversation went beyond the surface level to really dive into what needs to be done to tackle the most important issues around interoperability and cybersecurity in healthcare. So in this episode, we talk about advice for CIOs to demystify interoperability within an API-enabled health ecosystem, as well as best practices for interoperable cybersecurity challenges. We explore security concerns with sharing and the impact of recent breaches on data safety. And we unpack some strategies for data consolidation in Australia and New Zealand, while keeping patient consent and data protection front and centre. Collaboration starts with the conversation, Team HealthTech. Let's make it happen.
Welcome to Talking HealthTech, featuring content and community about technology and healthcare. We acknowledge the traditional owners of lands these conversations were recorded and pay respect to elders past and present.
My name is Peter Birch, host of Talking HealthTech. You're here for a webinar, and this is live. It's a live recording, as you can tell. Otherwise, if it was too polished, then that wouldn't have been fun, would it? We're problem solvers together, people. Here on the Talking HealthTech podcast, we talk about all things collaboration and innovation in healthcare and technology. Firstly, before kicking things off, rather than sharing my screen, I've got some really cool slides that I had to talk about this, but I'm going to wing it. So the first up, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands these conversations are held today. I'm on the land of the Bijigal of the Darug Nation, and I pay respect to the elders past and present, and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that might be joining us today. Now, if you're attending live, and if you would like to enable closed captions, those are definitely working down the bottom there. It's a feature that's within Zoom, and it provides, the live text of the conversation we're having. So just click on closed captions down the bottom there, and they'll show immediately for you in this session today. Also, quickly, that's all fine here. I'm making sure that we've still got stuff happening here in the chat. Lots of messages there, mate. Excellent. We can see we've got Lauren. It's flying through here. I can't even keep up. We've got Paris. We've got people representing Yoni. We've got a good representation from Bendigo Hospital. The whole patient experience side with Alan. We've got another Peter as well from Hunter North. Is that Hunter North? PHN. So you shouldn't do live decoding of acronyms on a webinar, should you? Great representation. Drop your message in the chat, keep those coming, because we're going to kick off. So you can see here we've got a good representation of people here in the chat. But firstly, I'm going to throw to Chris and Stephen to give a bit more context about yourselves. Chris, I might start with you, sir.
So I'm Chris Royle. I'm a solutions architect, as you said, with Dedalus. I've been here for 30 years. I'm really focused in the last 10, 15 years on interoperability, and more recently in the FHIR space. I am a HL7 FHIR trainer for HL7 Australia and HL7 New Zealand board member. So really passionate around interoperability and how it can solve challenges, but also around the innovation aspects. How do we open up that data and innovate with it? And that's what I do at Dedalus.
Well, thank you. And Steve, and what about yourself?
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Peter. So I've been with Dedalus about almost 3 years now. It seems crazy to think it's that long. I look after the architecture capability for our region. I look after the security of our practice, both of our products and of our services. I look after our cloud platform and our cloud engineering team. So a big focus for me is how we move from being a traditional product-based business where we provide software to how we provide that to our customers as a service. And of course, that brings into light all sorts of interesting complexities around interoperability and security. Interoperability itself is one of the practices in my team, and we're the home of we're DC4H, which is one of our products that lives in region, and Chris will be talking about that a little bit later on. And our technical managed services, both on-prem and cloud-based resources. Prior to being at Dedalus, I ran cyber incident response and intelligence for IBM Security. So my life and my world has been, responding to the biggest cyber incidents across the globe. And then prior to that, I was actually at NETA, and this will come up later in our conversations. I was at NETA, the National Health Authority, as the CIO there as well. So I want to weave that into the conversation a little bit later on as well. So that's me, and that's a little bit about what I do at NETA, at Dedalus, sorry.
Yeah, excellent. No, well, look, we've got representation from people in the chat too that probably have some experience with you in those times as well. I can
Absolutely
see a few familiar names and faces that have popped up there. But for Dedalus as well, it's a familiar name within healthcare, Stephen. But if you're within the industry, I guess, and we've seen you out and about. But give us a little bit more context in terms of what Dedalus is about, particularly in our region.
Absolutely, and it's a fantastic question because about 3 years ago, as I said just before I started, I got a phone call from someone who said, we're looking for a CTO at Dedalus. Would you be interested?" And my first question was, "Who's Dedalus?" And I think we've still got some massive work to do around what our name is and what our brand is. But it's important to realise that the Dedalus Group supports over 7,500 healthcare organisations and over 5,000 diagnostic centres worldwide. Serving a population of more than 540 million people. Our solutions literally cover the entire continuum of care. We've got a massive focus on open standards. It's not all, our approach, and this is why it's great to be here with Chris today. It's not all about saying this all has to be a Dedalus solution, top to bottom, left to right, stack to bottom. Our focus is how do we actually do this from an interoperable point of view, and how do we actually enable that for creating a healthcare ecosystem that ultimately provides patient care while contributing to the healthier planet. In region here, we've actually got 35 plus years of story to tell. So I said earlier, I received that phone call, and my first question was, "Who's Dedalus?" So obviously Dedalus was an organization 35 to 40 years based in Italy who was purchasing at the time DXC Healthcare. And when I actually unpacked who they were, what I actually uncovered, and this is important for everybody to know, we've actually been in region for 35 plus years supporting ANZ Healthcare. We've got over 800 solution implementations and increasing across the region. We've got a customer presence in every state of Australia. We've got a very broad presence in the private healthcare market. In Australia, we're dealing with 30 million plus patient interactions per year, 150 plus private hospitals, 630 public hospitals, 8 million inpatient administrations, 23.5 million outpatient emergency episodes. So we have a significant footprint, across the ANZ region, and this is what was actually attractive to Dedalus when the merger was done. So although the name Dedalus is new to people, it's important to know that we have been here for 35 plus years. We're in every state, we're in every New Zealand public hospital. We've got many to most private hospital groups, and we're also in many independent private hospitals as well.
Yeah, got it. Well, that's helpful. And Chris, for your particular role, Stephen mentioned that it's really good to have you involved in this conversation too. What angle do you take on all of this through Dedalus?
Certainly from an interoperability perspective. So how do we open up our solutions, make them more standards-based to interoperate both within each other's, but also externally to other systems that are in the health ecosystem. We go into organizations that won't have, every system that Dedalus can provide, but they'll have some systems. So how do we interoperate with those other systems in that health ecosystem to make it make sense and provide access to users and patients alike?
Yeah, and it's if you're in industry, in inverted commas, in healthcare and digital health, we talk about interoperability a lot, and I think it's important that we frame that up for this conversation too, in terms of why we're putting such focus and importance on that as a topic. But when we talk about interoperability and opening up data, that's what we mean, right? To be able to then enable some of those outcomes and for patients and clinicians.
A great question. So it is all about, for me anyway, sharing information across systems, but also care settings and more recently across boundaries. So, patients traveling from one state to the next, even one country to the next, how does that data get effectively shared? And me as a patient, how do I share my information so that I don't have to repeat my story to every every clinician I go and see?
Chris, it's an interesting story you say. I just want to jump in there. Sorry if I chopped you off, but I remember when I first started working at Queensland Health many years ago, and I had some clinicians say to me, it's great to be able to share this information outside the hospital boundaries, but we'd just be happy to share it from floor 2 to floor 3. Yeah. And that still rings in my mind, like how important it is for this industry to change the healthcare outcomes for people, to change the experience for the what is ultimately the customer, us as a consumer, to be able to do that. Just how hard it is to share that information currently, literally between floors, and that's got to be where we have to start from.
I think that we've got the big lofty goals in mind, and that's what we need to strive for. But we've got healthcare that needs to be done within settings right now that we've got those gaps. So
yeah,
that's super important. And then the cybersecurity piece, because we've brought these two pieces together in the heading of this conversation. And Stephen, that's your jam?
It is, so as I mentioned at the start, Peter, look, my role is to look after the security aspects of our products and our services. And one of the reasons when Dedalus purchased what was DXC Healthcare and created my role was around saying, how do we move our business from a traditional product-based business to a services-based business? And one of the massive aspects of that is around the cybersecurity aspects. For that. So being custodians of healthcare information, is critically important. Also, having been a CIO previously, it's so important. If a CIO is going to be able to transform a business and to be able, we often talk at Dedalus about the we call it the great divide between the demands of the business versus the abilities of the IT department, and there's a gap between the two of them. In order to get where we need to get to in terms of being able to deliver business for the business, and we call it the quiet crisis. It's often not spoken about, but it needs to be discussed. In order to address that gap, a CIO or CTO needs to be able to open up the information of the business. And in order to do that, absolutely, it creates opportunity for, I don't want to use the word hackers, but it creates the opportunity for havoc. So I'll use that word instead. And it's about respecting. We need to make sure that we can manage the holy trinity of cybersecurity is around managing the confidentiality, the information, the integrity and the availability of that information. Availability, well, that's where ransomware kicks in. The integrity is where things get fiddled with, and the confidentiality is when people steal stuff. So there's a real balancing act for any CIO or CTO or anybody who's in that space to be able to say, well, how much do I open this up in terms of interoperability versus how much do I need to manage the risk of the business? And I do honestly believe there's a massive story for the likes of FHIR to actually play in this space around its ability to deliver RBAC authentication to the resources, etc. So there's a great way that I believe we can actually work to deliver this. And maybe I'll sort of just pause there for a second and see if Chris has got anything to chime in on the back of around the role of FHIR in this space, because it's certainly something that we haven't had in the past, or we haven't had that level of granularity in the past. And now we're here, and it's important, and we'll probably talk a little bit later about the role of things like the FHIR accelerator working in the region to actually grow that out. So I might pause and just see if Chris has got something to say.
Because I want to hear from Chris, because when you were talking there, I could imagine that a CIO could be looking at what's we're talking about here is almost like a spectrum of like, I can be more interoperable, but if I slide it up more this way, I'm getting further away from being secure. So like, where do I
absolutely
sit? And often we kind of sit in this middle nothing ground.
I often talk just to that point. I often talk about, from a cybersecurity point of view, I often talk about a wheel, and I talk about identify, protect, detect, respond, recover around a wheel. And it's like a wheel balance. And what you need to do is you actually need to invest your effort, around that whole wheel.
Yeah.
And what I mean there is, if you went in to get a wheel alignment for your car and they put the weight all on one side, the wheel's going to be out of balance. And it's really important that you understand that spectrum, and that's exactly the point you just made about setting that balance right. And it's exactly that, for a CIO, CTO, whoever it is, a chief digital officer, to be successful, they need to set that dial at the right space, and it's the right space at the right time. But that requires other things to be done.
Yeah, talk to me more about these other things, Chris.
Yeah, I was just going to say. So security has always been a part of anything that we do from a systems perspective, and in the integration space and the interop space, it's always kind of been there. But when we did HL7 messaging within an organization, we kind of protected the systems that were at each endpoint. We kind of tried to secure the channel in which that was delivered. But now we're opening up the data to more consumers, both within the organization, but also outside the organization. So the way that we need to secure it and protect it's changing as well. So if we look at the National Health Interoperability Plan that's been released, nationally, it looks at 5 sort of focus or priority areas. And priority area 3 was all around information sharing. And it's how do we push data outside the walls of the organization, opening it up for patients themselves. Well, that has different potential threats now than when we were just sending HL7 messages around the organization. So how does that sort of change? And I like Stephen's analysis of the wheel and sort of balancing that wheel. But as we extend our ecosystem out, we open up the data to more potential threats. How do we then secure those? But also the other key thing I wanted to drill on is consent management. FHIR does have this small piece, or it seems like a small piece within the standard around consent and how consent can be shared. We're going to see more of that going forward. How as a patient do I get to say who can access my record and for what purposes? And so certainly a part of the Digital Connect for Health platform that we have within Dedalus is our consent management tier. So nothing can gain access without going through that consent management layer. And I think more and more when we see that part of the standard, and that represented within the National Health Interoperability Plan, it's showing that importance that consent has in the whole story of access to data, not just from a security point of view, but a privacy point of view as well.
Yeah, super important. That's a great example. And I love being able to speak about those examples of seeing this stuff in the real world. So the consent management piece is one that you've just kind of unpacked a little bit there, Chris. I'd love to hear any more examples that you might have in how Dedalus is playing in this space.
So some examples, one of our customers in New Zealand, we implemented our Digital Connect platform, DC4H there, and it was to solve a really simple use case. They wanted to know mental health patients that arrived in ED. So they would have these mental health patients that would arrive into ED for some particular health issue, and weeks later, the mental health team would be notified that that patient had attended ED, but it was too late then for them to really treat the root cause. So we created quite a simple use case or a simple technology solution, but solved a really key problem for them. So identifying real time as patients arrived in ED that had mental health issues, so that we could alert the mental health team to come and see the patient straight away, so we could get faster intervention back to the patient to solve that particular problem for the mental health team, but also for the patient themselves. That's just one use case that we can deliver using the platform.
Yeah, it's great being able to hear the benefits for the different stakeholders in that process too, because that's critically important, not just for the clinicians, but for the patients as well. Do keep those coming there in the chat if you're watching this webinar, or if you're attending this webinar live. I can see some great comments from Dr. Jadamani Singh. Apologies for the pronunciation, but as he's mentioned, if interoperability standards are not well defined or universally adopted, there are going to be inconsistencies in data formats and security protocols, making it easier for hackers to exploit vulnerabilities. I can see Ralas as well, who actually submitted some questions for the Q&A too. So thank you to Ralas, who from DB Results. We'll get to those questions in a second too. So do leave your comments or questions in the chat as we continue this conversation, because we're going to open up some time shortly to dive into some of those.
Peter, back on that last question. Terminology is key. A common terminology that's known between organisations. So that the use of SNOMED CTAU as a way of getting that common understanding between applications and between care settings. So as we push those boundaries out, how do we start to get the common meaning or that semantic interoperability enabled at those sort of endpoints?
Yeah,
it's really important.
Got you. Hey, I'm keen to keep this a flowing conversation, because I can see here, before we forget, the Kerry Robbins in the chat has asked, in the recent example, has the patient consented to this in notification from ED? So I guess that we're talking about the different examples that you spoke to, Chris.
So in that example, yes, they have consented to that particular notification. Consent is an interesting one, and there's so many different layers of consent. Consent to treat, consent to share patient information, consent to sharing that information with research organisations. So even, we were looking at pushing the information out. How far do we push it out? Is it for clinical research? Is it for research inside the organisation or external to the organisation? So consent is multi-layered and needs to be considered as part of that full interoperability story.
Yeah, I can see that also in the Q&A section here. Lisa's also asked the same question pretty much in a similar way too, about managing informed consent in all those kind of different areas too. So hopefully we've spoken to that point there. A really important part of this whole kind of process. Gents, as we've been speaking, I'm keen to learn, because you're quite involved across the globe in healthcare and seeing different parts and been on that journey for quite a while. I'm interested to understand, in terms of like the CIOs and CTOs that are kind of listening to this session or attending live, at what point do they reach out to Dedalus to kind of talk about some of these issues or challenges? Because, there's I think we're quite good in healthcare at waiting for it's in any industry. Fixing an issue when it's broken, or something breaks and you've got to act on it immediately, being kind of upfront is a little bit more tricky, but it's quite vague too. When should people be speaking to Dedalus about what?
I think it's a great question, Peter. And that probably sort of keys into the conversation I had earlier about the quiet crisis. So how do CIOs and CXOs, CDOs, whoever it's going to be, how do they tap in and get ahead of that curve and deliver value back to the business? Because there is a gap between what is expected from the business and what our technology corporations can actually provide. So the answer is reach out as soon as possible. I think the point that Chris touched on earlier is probably one of our best examples. Come to us with a use case. What is it that you're trying to solve? What is the problem? Whether it be around mental health whether it be around, outpatient management, whether it be around whatever, come to us with a business problem, and we can work out, and we can actually, look at what we've done elsewhere around how to solve that. To be honest, and this is hard to say. I'm the chief technology officer. Don't come to me with a technology problem, because that's boring, and that actually won't get solved, and it won't get buy-in from the business. So you've got to come with a business problem and say, what can you do, Dedalus, to help us work through this? And the example that Chris has given, that's only one of many about how we've actually used interoperability to solve those. And we're talking about interoperability of clinical systems across modalities of conversation, and integration with Microsoft Teams and all sorts of things. We've done some pretty cool stuff. So the question is, the answer to your question is, bring the question to us, and let us work through how we have addressed either that or similar situations in other areas. But don't come with the technology, because technology is boring.
Spice it up. No, but you're right. Yeah.
Just to add to that, having led a number of these innovation projects, and I'll call them innovation projects, and they innovate on the edge of our applications or other vendors' applications, we're able to do in weeks. It's not months of activity. It's short and sharp engagements to solve the business problem that our customers have. And it's making a real difference. I mean, the thing that Stephen just talked about around the Teams integration was done in the heat of COVID alongside telehealth services in New Zealand. So integrating alongside our patient administration systems to streamline that booking of telehealth services for patients.
And that's I guess to my point, you bring the business problem. And let's focus on that, and let's get into a sprint cycle around how we resolve that, rather than here's all of the utopian requirements, because often you don't know what all of those are. So let's just get in and say, here's a use case. What can we do better about this?
Hey, gents, I want to geek out about this chat, the themes that are coming here, because I'm mentally aggregating some of these topics and themes on what's kind of hot on people's minds.
Mentally aggregating, that's awesome.
You can use that one. But I've got Joe in the Q&A, and I can see a few more dropping in now, but asking about what lessons we're learning internationally. And that kind of ties into Dwayne's question about, what's the place for HIEs in overcoming interoperability challenges like we've seen in Malafi in UAE. And I have seen the international question has come up a few times as well. I might throw to either of you about looking at, other parts of the world, how we can start to leverage some of those lessons and maybe even leapfrog.
Going to take it first, Steve, and I'll come add too.
Oh, I was going to throw to you.
Oh, okay, all right. No, that's cool. So I would say certainly some of the things that we're seeing. So in the US, a lot of investment in the FHIR space, and certainly having just finished a HL7 fundamentals developers training course last week. Lots of information coming up around usage of FHIR in the States, and it's great to see so much investment happening in countries around FHIR, and the great work that's happening here in the Spark Accelerator program is just it's pushing FHIR into organizations that, are still back in I'd say the dark ages of HL7 V2 messaging, but, we've been living with it for 30, 40 years, and we need to move on from there. So a lot of work happening in the States, but also a lot of work happening here now with the Spark program. In the UK, the move from HL7 V3 to using more FHIR. So we're starting to see that standards growing globally. And that means that, the vendors like us, Dedalus, and others have to start moving to FHIR to get relevance in our region, and be interconnected with other applications that we need to work with on a daily basis.
I think it's a really good point you make, Chris. And I would also call out the work that's happening around Spark and the FHIR Accelerator and everything here in region. I mentioned at the intro that my background, I worked at NETA, so I've lived through the heartache of the sticks and carrots around how do you try and drive industry, how do you try and move the healthcare sector to a point that actually works. And I sit back and I reflect now about the work that's happening with that FHIR accelerator, and I think that's a fantastic initiative to bring people together to collaborate. And at the end of the day, collaboration is the start of how we move this. It's my personal belief is it's impossible to do. Here's a stick, here's a carrot. It's kind of irrelevant. What you actually need to do is you actually need to move people together, and you need to bring together the vendor industry. You need to bring together the government, the regulators, the legislation, the software providers, the consumers, the healthcare sector. You need to bring all those people on a journey, and that's actually what that initiative is actually doing. So my big call out is that that's a great thing, and that everybody should, to the point they can get on board and move in that direction. I think that's how we move the sector forward. I think that's how we get to a point where there's always the question of how do we set the barrier of entry in terms of requirements to be able to do X, Y, Z, whatever. And it's always really hard when you're starting from nowhere. So what you've got to do, you've got to start a movement, and that's what that FHIR accelerator has done. And I think, from an interoperability point of view, that's absolutely the right approach to go through. And that will actually help inform what contributors need to do, what software vendors need to do, what the government needs to do, and it will actually help harmonise all of that together.
Yeah, and building on that, because I can see Yanni's put in the chat and in the Q&A too, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit in terms of the two questions he's put up, but basically this question around, is this a movement that needs to come from above? I guess we've seen My Health Record and things coming from, I guess, at a big picture scale, but then there's questions around its usability and like in any situation, my interpretation is that, something coming from a big Goliath from up top is going to be slow to move and innovate, which is why then people might look at, say, the earlier, like the startups can build things, or like in the private space in the US, as Yanni's kind of pointed out, there's private entities that have done things, but also then when they get breached, you haven't got that protection too. And then you can start to, at least in my mind, if you've got a lot of private entities kind of creating things in silos, this is the whole problem that we're talking about in the first place, right? So I think having that coordinated approach with these programs is the right direction for us. Yeah. Yes, we have been talking about it in healthcare for a while, but I haven't seen this level of, I guess, engagement and traction that we have now.
I totally agree.
These discussions too. So
I totally agree. And look, as I said, look, I've been on the vendor side personally. I've been on the government side. But to me, this is the best demonstration of all of it coming together, and not just vendor and government. It's also consumer, and it's everybody coming together. To me, this is an exciting time, and I applaud the work that's being done there.
Yeah, great, excellent. Let me just work through, because it would be remiss of me not to address, and I'm going to consolidate Malcolm's point about question about integrating clinical terminologies into a large language model for clinicians for conversational AI in practice, which also then ties in, like, are there any plans for this? And that ties in also with Andrew Wiltshire's question about, does generative AI play a role in semantic interoperability between different data sets too? Because if I think about it, we're spending all this time trying to put stuff into ICD-9, sorry, you can tell me how long ago since I worked in a clinic, but ICD-10 or whatever we're up to now, or SNOMED, and but then we're not computers. We're really good at dealing with the human parts. But why not we just get the technology to work out what we've said and then code it? We're spending so much time trying to feed the computer with the codes. Can't just AI fix this problem now? Are we spending all this time building stuff that is not even going to be? Yeah. So this feels like a Stephen question, but it could be either. I think, or maybe it's a philosophical one.
I was gonna start with there is a lot of work happening in the natural language processing space around looking at clinical narrative and codifying that data. it does get into a grey area around regulation and protections for the codes that do get suggested, to make sure that at the moment there's some clinical governance over that selection. But I think, as we move forward in the AI space, maybe some of that will change. And certainly the large language model work, there's a lot of thought around having sort of private instances of those large language models to protect the clinically relevant or the clinically appropriate data that's provided in that, or the personally identifiable data at least.
And I think this AI point does continue as a theme throughout the thread. I can just see I'm calling out Luke. Luke Moran has just shared with us in the chat too, a news story only an hour ago that went live about hospitals that are relying on physical copies of notes being under patient pillows or as stickers on chests. So and this is 2024. This is an issue that we start to think, well, we're beyond this. It's kind of real stuff happening right now.
I won't talk about a personal experience where I was put in an ambulance a couple of years ago, and as I got in the ambulance, they gave me the CD and they said, "Hang on to this."
Yeah, right. Like it's
literally.
We're better than this. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
And this is my point earlier about the need is there to be able to share and interoperate and make our information interoperable. We absolutely have to do this to address the needs of the consumers of the healthcare industry, to make it sustainable, to be able to transform the businesses. I mean, we need to move this stuff forward. So what we actually need to do is we need to do that hand in glove with managing the security aspects of that. So when we look at something like FHIR and RBAC models and all sorts of things, it's a good solution to be able to work with that. It's certainly a lot better than what we had previously around securing the resources, etc. So it needs to be front of mind for everybody about how we transform our businesses.
And I think the other point too is that we're leveraging existing standards that are out in the workplace, out in the wild. OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect and RBAC models. It's not it might be new for healthcare, but it's not new for the rest of the world. So that also brings into your point before, Peter, around the new players into the market around some of the apps that they might want to deliver. But also reduces hopefully the costs of some of that interoperability around, we're opening up to small players. The standard is free, so we don't have to pay a tax to use the standard. So hopefully it sparks a lot more innovation and a lot more players into healthcare interoperability.
Hey, I can see Ralas, who's active in the chat, has also submitted a bunch of questions prior, which we appreciate, and just kind of consolidating some of those points that have been raised too. Because an interesting one that's been raised there in the chat was that they said, using the wheel of security analogy, what forward thinking needs to be put in place to cater for the inevitable data breach? Because even if the data is encrypted, then this ties into a question that they asked before. It's kind of like the I didn't know that was an acronym. Steal now, decrypt later. SNDL.
Decrypt later. Yeah. Exactly.
So I guess even if it's all locked up, you can take it and then work out what to do with it.
It's a great one. Steal a whole bunch of information now. Not that you can even read it, and this is one of the game changers, right? People are actively filtering this information out, exfiltrating it from organisations, with a view to say, well, at some point in time, I will try to work out how to decrypt that information. So steal now, decrypt later. A couple of different variations on that acronym, and this is a great one because there's probably two key threats to this one. Number one is quantum computing. So quantum computing plays a threat to be able to break existing encryption algorithms. And if you look at the physics side of the equation, at a certain point in time, we will be able to break the cryptographic algorithms that are there. And if you've got this information, you'll be able to unlock it. I think probably more realistically, and I think what will happen first is we'll actually break the human side of the equation, which is around, there's two big gaps in cryptography, storing information at the moment. One is around, the distribution of the keys, and the other one's around the management of the keys. If somebody can work out a way, and they can, to be able to compromise and get access to those asymmetrical keys, any information that they have exfiltrated, they will be able to get access to. So it is really important that there are most likely people who are sitting on banks of information, waiting to release it. So this is like WikiLeaks 4.0, when information is going to be released, to the masses, whether it be PII or whatever it's going to be. And if you start to then look at, what's the impact on that upon things like the Privacy Act, and what our obligations are to notify breaches to the OIC. There's some pretty huge impacts on that.
Yeah.
I'll pause there. I'll probably be enough.
No. Look, and as you're talking though, I'm thinking about, you raise a point that, our technology on the good guys side is getting faster and better, and we can write really good standards and everything. But just as fast as technology happens on the good side, it gets even faster and greater stakes in healthcare, because healthcare data is worth a lot of money, and we've heard some of that too. But then I think, is this, and I've got no dog in this fight either, but I think about like the different ways, like what's the break fix? Because you can't just keep getting faster and better and expect ones, and then they're going to go, oh, it's too hard now. Like that's not going to happen. Is the whole, and Dwayne, brought up this question too around, does a decentralized model kind of come into play here? Looking at decentralizing data, different ways to do things, and looking purely at isolation at some of the things. Is there a kind of step change that needs to happen here, or is there better ways to think about this? Somewhat overwhelming. It can be disheartening sometimes. It's like, well, no matter what we do on this side of the good side, there's always going to be harder, better, faster on the threat side.
No, it's a great point you make, and there was a great saying that one of my colleagues used to say to me: as a good guy, you need to get it right every single day. And what he meant was, you need to get the protection in place every single day to make sure that all this information is secure and safe. As a bad guy, you only need to get it right once. And once you've popped it, you're on your way. So there does need to be step change, and we need to work out a way to limit the liability when something actually happens. And this is always my point. It has to be front of mind for people. It's not a case of if this happens, it's when it happens. And this also relates to one of the questions that came in before today, around notifiable breach as well. My call out to organizations is don't sit around waiting for when this is going to happen. Be prepared for when it happens. And what I mean by that is, be very clear about how you're going to respond, and importantly, how you're going to manage the communications, not just within your business, but to your customers as well. There's actually some very interesting examples. If I look at the Australian Red Cross was one of the biggest data breaches of its time a few years ago, but it's also lauded as one of the best managed breaches because of the way that they communicated with the customers. There's this trade-off between what you tell the regulatory authorities versus what you tell the customers, etc. And it is very hard to manage because they're on opposite ends of the balance pole. But it's really important to be able to understand how you're going to do that. And when you look back at it, Australia Red Cross did a fantastic job of managing the communications to their customers around what the state of the information breach was, what was happening, what they were doing about it, etc. It's really hard. Like, I've been there. You can't tell them too much. You can't tell them what you don't know. You can't tell them the things that you're speculating on. But you need to be prepared to communicate, to let people know what they need to do, and that's how it plugs into the regulatory things. Because from a regulatory and legislation point of view, you actually need to tell people what they need to do to protect themselves. That's actually the requirement. The missing piece that's in there at the moment is around what the time frame is to do that. But my personal advice is, be on the front foot for that.
great advice. And the on this theme of the duty to all the stakeholders in that example as the customer, let's say, or those that have been breached. Jade in the chat has raised the important point that, or in the Q&A, I should say, that it's, and I'm patients often have to fight to even access their own medical records, and they're told to get a freedom of information request to do so. It's really hard for a patient to get access to their information. We don't want breaches, but we also want to be able to make it easy and controllable for a patient as well, which I think, Chris, you were touching on this a little bit earlier too.
Yeah, I mean, as health maturity or knowledge increases from our patient cohort, we need to supply them with the information that they need. I know I've had my own personal experiences around wanting to gain access to parts of my health record, so that I could share with my other health providers, so that I could get the treatment or the care that I needed. So every person should have that same sort of access to their information in a way that they can share it without having to tell the story multiple times to each clinician they deal with. We don't want that information to fall through the cracks.
Hey, look, I haven't been, apologies, Nalika, I haven't been neglecting you. It's a great question about the, what the anatomy of a cyber attack is. I might kind of paraphrase that in a second for Stephen, but we might take that as I've
got a whole presentation on that one.
Well, I guess, and what he's raised is that important point too. What does that actually look like in healthcare? Is it the nefarious bad actors acting externally?
I literally did that presentation internally to our business a few weeks ago, and I've got a slide that is called, quote unquote, the anatomy of a cyber attack.
Maybe he was attending. I know. yeah. But it happens internally and externally. Yeah.
It's not just opportunistic. These guys, this is organized crime. Don't get it wrong. These are people. The lead time, I'm just trying to think of the numbers at the moment. The industry average for when an organization gets compromised, infiltrated, to when they actually realize it happens, the industry average is about 180 days. The healthcare industry average is about 220 days. They're well behind, and there's a whole story about lack of investment for monitoring capabilities, etc. And again, so we measure two key things. One is the time to detect. One is the time to recover. And the time to recover is, again, industry average about 60 days, healthcare industry about 80 days. I can speak personally. I worked on one of the biggest cyber attacks on an organisation here in Australia, or a whole healthcare region here in Australia. It took us about 3 months to bring that region for healthcare back online fully.
Yeah, wow, that's a long time.
Yeah,
to be off. So
yeah, and it's kind of scary, right? It's kind of scary. You go home tonight and you realise your TV's been stolen. You're like, oh, that's terrible. And then just think about the step before that. Okay, they've stolen my TV because they've actually been in my house for the last 200 days, watching everything I do, watching, how I operate. They know who I talk to. They know when I go into the house, when I go out of the house. They know all my patterns. That's the really scary thing, and that's actually the reality of what happens from a cyber perspective. So that lead time to what actually occurs is kind of compromising for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, look, I can tell by the quality of the conversation in the chat that the attendees here are not going to have a blank spot after this webinar, and we greatly respect their time. So we're coming up near the end here of this discussion. I apologize I can see Jadamani and Kerry and Kate have also shared a lot of great things, and all the other attendees. But to help me kind of round it out here, Chris and Stephen, what can we look forward to seeing from Dedalus over the next 6, 12, 24, whether it's in the space of the interoperability and cyberspace or just generally overall?
You want to start, Chris?
Yeah, just we're excited to be implementing a DC4H platform for a private hospital here in Australia, which is going to be fully managed interoperability platform, from cloud all the way through to manage their end-to-end interoperability challenges. So I'm looking forward to that Steve, I don't know if you got some more ones.
Yeah, I got probably three things to add to that. So, as well as the DC4H stuff you've spoken about, where we continue to and a lot of people would have seen the announcements around us bringing Orbis, our EMR capability, to region. So that's happening. Our managed services capability. So as I said, one of the things is around our transition from being traditional product to managed services and how we deliver that. So that continues to happen in terms of things like our WebPAS offering, our MedChart offering. We continue to deliver this managed service to be able to provide this back to customers in a form that is easier for them to consume. We have, with the merger with Dedalus and the acquisition through Dedalus, we've got access to some incredible new products. So we're actively bringing other products to market, like Amphi, which is around ambulatory care and pre-hospital medical records, and also SwiftQ. And this is probably the last point I'll just make around really stronger engagement with our customers outside of the hospital. So traditionally we've been how does Dedalus operate inside a hospital? We're really looking to say, how do we expand that? And what are the products and capabilities to engage our customers, consumers of healthcare outside of the hospital? So a lot of people talk about patient-centered healthcare. We like to talk about patient-engaged healthcare and patient-controlled healthcare. So it's about putting that control in the hands of the patient, of the consumer.
But look, well, Steve and Chris, we're going to have to leave it there. There's still questions and comments rolling in on either side, but we'll do our best to kind of consolidate some of those thoughts. This will be a recording that'll go out on the Talking HealthTech podcast. There'll be a comprehensive article that follows that too. We'll try and capture the essence of those questions in that too. And do reach out to us if you want to continue that conversation, either directly through Talking HealthTech or with Chris or Stephen, and we can keep that conversation going. So, gents, I really appreciate you making the time.
Thanks,
cool. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, chat.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Chris.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Talking Health Tech. Make sure you like and subscribe and share this episode with someone who might find it valuable. For more information and resources about healthcare innovation, visit talkinghealthtech.com.